Hey there!
What?
Have you ever wanted to watch a retrospective on the most iconic James Bond movie in honor of its 60-year anniversary? Well, you're in the right place. We're doing Goldfinger.
Goldfinger.
That's right, in honor of the 60-year anniversary of Goldfinger's premiere on September 17th, 1964, we are doing 60 minutes on the quintessential 007 experience.
Goldfinger.
In this retrospective look, we're doing a deep dive on the movie, the book, the history, Goldfinger's impact on cinema and the James Bond franchise, interviews, bonus features, movie commentary, even the secret Laserdisc commentary that enraged Albert R. Cubby Broccoli so much that he banned it. It's got some saucy stuff in it.
I don't think Fleming ever totally approved the treatment of his books. He thought they were much more serious, but he certainly approved of the success and rewards those films were to bring him.
Stay tuned, we're doing all that and more. This is 60 Minutes on 60 Years of Goldfinger. All right, let's go. Before we dive into the Goldfinger movie itself, let's touch briefly on its source material. Ian Fleming's novel, released 5 years before the movie in 1959. So Ian Fleming wrote the draft of Goldfinger in January and February of 1958, and that preceded the publication in March 1959. The original title of the manuscript was The Richest Man in the World. Fleming was noted for saying that this was by far the easiest of all the Bond stories for him to write. It just flew off the page.
Boredom is the worst sin, of course, of the human being.
Ian Fleming got the inspiration for the Goldfinger story via a chance encounter with a goldsmith at a spa in 1957. He found himself fascinated with the man's knowledge of the precious metal and spent the next 10 days absorbing everything he could learn about gold from this man.
And I think people like the action.
Another interesting piece of lore is Ian Fleming's inspiration for the villain, Goldfinger. Let me just preface by saying this, the more that I read about Ian Fleming, the more this guy sounds like an absolute rapscallion. So Ian Fleming got the inspiration for the name of the villain from Erno Goldfinger. Erno Goldfinger was a major figure in modernist architecture. Side note, he was also a filthy Marxist. So Erno Goldfinger actually built a house next to Fleming, where they lived in Hampstead, and it was this shockingly brutalist style for the time. Look at the screen.
Positively shocking.
Look at the beauty of this ideology, people. So inspiring, comrade.
For Mother Russia.
I will say that this looks rather tame compared to the visual gore we are subjected to nowadays, but this is still incredibly hideous. This is like James Bond's Disguise and You Only Live Twice level hideous.
Gombawa.
Anyways, Fleming agrees with me. He hated the style. He hated the destruction of the Victorian terraces of the area. So he decided to name a Bond villain after Erno in revenge.
When I lay my vengeance upon thee.
Erno, being the humorless Marxist that he was, did not take kindly to this. He threatened to sue Fleming and his publishers. Now, nobody knows exactly what happened with this. The matter was ultimately settled out of court, but legend has it that during the settlement process, Fleming seriously suggested that they change the final name of Goldfinger to Goldprick in the novel.
Damn!
And yeah, this Erno guy sounds like a real
Well, the trouble is that, as any thriller writer will tell you, the villain is a very difficult man to find anywhere.
But anyways, getting back to Goldfinger. So the Goldfinger novel is the 7th book
007.
in Ian Fleming's series. Before it is actually Dr. No, and before Dr. No was From Russia with Love.
Russia!
So the book movie order chronology is completely out of whack. If you're curious about the canon novel-based order of the stories, it goes like this. Fleming's first novel was Casino Royale, 1953. Followed by that is Live and Let Die, which of course is Roger Moore's debut movie, and then Moonraker. After Moonraker comes Diamonds Are Forever, which happened to be Sean Connery's last movie, and then after Diamonds Are Forever is where the first 3 movies come into play. From Russia with Love, followed by Dr. No, followed by Goldfinger. And then after Goldfinger is For Your Eyes Only, and then Thunderball. So Goldfinger and Thunderball kind of seem like the only two movies where they somewhat respected the chronology of the stories. And then after that, there's just a hodgepodge. The Spy Who Loved Me, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, You Only Live Twice, and then the last two are Man with the Golden Gun and Octopussy and the Living Daylights. Both of these were published posthumously after Fleming's death.
Playing his golden harp.
Something that Fleming does that's kind of unique to the Goldfinger novel is that he divides the structure of the novel into 3 named acts. Each act represents how Goldfinger describes Bond's seemingly coincidental meetings with him when he finally identifies Bond as an enemy at the end of Act 2. Act 1 is happenstance, representing their encounter in Miami. Act 2 is coincidence, their golf game. And Act 3 is enemy action, their encounter at Oryx warehouse in Geneva. The movie adaptation of Goldfinger diverges much further from the source material than either of the previous 2 movies. However, the changes made really comprise those iconic elements and Bondisms that Goldfinger is known so strongly for, really kind of the prototype of the Bond formula as we look back at this retrospectively nowadays. It's basically the template that so many Bonds in the future will copy. We'll take a closer look at the differences as we go through the film, but I'm going to just name some of the major ones right now that really stand out. First, the opening is completely different and much more fast-paced in the movie. Next, Bond is primed about Goldfinger to kick off the adventure from a character in Casino Royale, rather than from Felix Leiter/M. The novel doesn't have Q or any of the gadgets. This element was something that was really purely cooked up for the movies, and it started with Goldfinger. And people love Bond for the gadgets. I love Bond for the gadgets. Goldfinger's evil plan is completely different. He's trying to steal the gold rather than irradiating the supply chain. And there's no climactic final battle inside the Fort Knox vault with the ticking bomb. And then also Goldfinger and Oddjob die in a different manner. All right, I got just one more thing I want to say about this novel before we move on to the next section and talk about the pre-production of the movie. And I know we just started this retrospective, but I gotta rage a little bit here. Okay, in 2023, Ian Fleming Publications, the company that administers all of Fleming's literary works, had the Bond series edited as part of a sensitivity review to remove or reword some racial or ethnic descriptors. Okay, this is insane.
You're insane.
Some of the words and content towards women, the gays, and races, particularly Koreans, in Goldfinger, would be deemed unacceptable by the weak and ill-tempered minds of the fascist rainbow-munching goblins and untouchables of the modern day. But this is an absolute travesty to art and should incense not just all Bond fans, but all lovers of art, speech, and expression. We cannot, as a society, retroactively edit content in works to fit sensibilities of modern times. Do you want communist hell? This is how you get communist hell. It's a shame that this has happened, and the Fleming estate should be ashamed of themselves. But such is the way of things. Look at the screen. Read these books on the screen if you haven't. Just do it. Just do it.
Just do it!
I mean it. / rant over. So how did the Goldfinger movie come to fruition?
Goldfinger.
While From Russia with Love was in production, Richard Maibaum began working on the script for On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Richard Maibaum was the screenwriter who also worked on the script for the first 2 movies. However, the production was unable to secure the filming location in time for release in 1964. So, they wanted to do Thunderball, but they were still in the process of settling a long-standing legal dispute with Kevin McClory regarding the Thunderball rights.
Oh, Lord, no.
Yeah, that legal dispute. The legal dispute of all James Bond legal disputes. The legal dispute that turned out to be the biggest thorn in Everything or Nothing's side in all of the James Bond franchise history. The Thorn of Thorns. James Bond evil villain level thorn. Thornier than Xenia Onatopp. Side note, They were planning to do On Her Majesty's Secret Service after this movie, but instead went with Thunderball because they settled that legal kerfluffle. Kind of. Yeah. So the team ended up going with Goldfinger instead.
Goldfinger.
Richard Maibaum wrote up a draft treatment just as he did for the first two movies and handed it off to producers Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman. Richard Maibaum thought the original Goldfinger novel didn't quite have enough action at the start of the story, nor enough romance.
In Goldfinger, we decided to have a little mini adventure at the start of it, which had nothing to do then with the story that followed.
Interestingly, Richard Maibaum saw Dr. No as a mystery and From Russia with Love as a suspense story. But in contrast, he saw Goldfinger as more of a duel, and not a robbery as people would immediately probably jump to because Goldfinger wants to steal all the gold. Maibaum saw it as a duel of two minds, Bond versus Goldfinger, good versus evil, villain versus spy. And I think this perspective really helped elevate the story. Instead of Bond just going to stop some no-name villain with his crazy plot, he's engaging the villain. We're trying to understand the villain as an audience. We're trying to see what makes him tick, even though pretty much all that makes him tick is gold. We're trying to see how Bond's going to defeat this guy. The perspective helped drive the narrative to engage the audience with the villain, rather than Bond just stopping some dastardly robbery of all robberies for some no-name faceless villain. Thumbs up for me, Richard Maibaum. Maibaum also accurately identified a lot of very major plot holes with the novel. The big one is the climactic conclusion at Fort Knox. In the novel, Goldfinger, in fitting with his character, plans to steal all the gold at Fort Knox. However, Ian Fleming, probably in his martini-induced stupor,
I always have a martini at 5.
did not bother to calculate the logistics required to perform such an operation. They apparently did the calculation. That's why Bond says it in the movie.
60 men would take 12 days to load it onto 200 trucks.
It takes about 12 days to remove all the gold in Fort Knox, based on their estimations. How's Goldfinger gonna do this? The gas is only supposed to last like 24 hours. Well, to be fair, in the book, he just kills everybody. But regardless. So anyways, they changed it to what we see in the final movie. Goldfinger instead wants to break into Fort Knox to irradiate the gold repository, greatly increasing the value of his own holdings, and all the mafia men he murders for no reason. Trading one plot hole for another. Truly the circle of life.
A great circle of life.
This one's going to give you a thumbs down, Richard Maibaum. And as you've probably intuited at this point, this means that many of those fondly remembered moments in the movie just do not exist in the novel, such as the battle with Oddjob in the vault and the bomb itself, complete with the timer stopping on 007. Anyways, Richard Maibaum gave them the script, Harry Saltzman read it and thought it was too American. So they brought in Paul Dane to give the script a pass. Paul Dane gave the script a pass, they sent it around, and Sean Connery ended up not liking the revisions. So they brought back Richard Maibaum again for another round of final polish. Running in parallel to this, From Russia with Love hit the box office, ended up being a massive success, even more so than Dr. No. So that gave Harry Saltzman and Albert Broccoli a lot of confidence to give Goldfinger a way larger budget than Dr. No or From Russia with Love. In fact, Goldfinger ended up getting a larger budget than both of the previous two movies combined, the budget being $3 million. $3 million doesn't sound like a lot nowadays. Whoa, what?
Wow.
Wow. Is that in yen? No, that's dollars. Terrence Young, the director for the first two movies, did not end up returning for Goldfinger. There was a pay dispute between him and the producers. He wanted a percentage of the film's revenue. so they did not bring him back. There's a lot of stories about people being upset with the producers not paying them enough. One of the more public ones is actually Sean Connery himself, but that's a story for another video. So instead, the producers decided to bring in Guy Hamilton, someone they had considered for the very first movie, Dr. No. He was a venerated British director, so a very solid choice. And I really think it worked out. Hamilton's contributions to Goldfinger cannot be understated. He brought in the inspirations for Q, as well as expressing the need for a bit more humor than what the novels had.
Goldfinger was a bit of a challenge because I began to sense that Bond was becoming a Superman and using the things that worked so wonderfully well in the two previous films. It was then not too difficult to have a target and know what we were trying to do.
But for this legendary Bond film to truly succeed, the team knew that they had to find the perfect actor to cast opposite to Sean Connery as the dastardly Goldfinger, the other half of this duel. Richard Maibaum wrote a letter to Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman in April 1963 suggesting Victor Buono for the role. Saltzman and Broccoli, on the other hand, wanted Orson Welles, but Orson Welles costed way too much. But somehow that illegitimate James Bond movie Casino Royale got Orson Welles. So I don't know how they could afford it, but the Bond producers couldn't. All these stories about pay disputes and this, maybe these guys really were a little bit of cheapskates. Why didn't they just save money and have one of them play Goldfinger? They're both kind of chubby like Goldfinger. Broccoli and Saltzman saw Gert Frobe playing a child molester in some German film, and they loved him in that role, so they knew they had found their Goldfinger.
Gert Frobe, I'd seen him, or Cubby had seen him and showed him to me in a German film where he was playing a sort of child molester.
They screen tested a couple other actors. Here's some footage, but neither of these guys have the same sheer acting ability as Gert Frobe. It's also kind of funny how they just painted these guys gold because, it's Goldfinger, we gotta make him gold and give him red hair. This guy looks like a leprechaun. Look how the demeanor of this guy's face changes once they put the wig on him. Oh yeah, look at me, I'm Goldfinger. Oh man, I look stupid. Oh yeah. Shucks, I ain't ever gonna get the part now. Look at him. He knows. It's so over. You'll get him next time, champ. Come on. They couldn't find something better than this? Sean Connery wore a toupee in every single Bond movie. There's also this really bit of funny lore about Gert Frobe and speaking English to play the part. So Frobe's agent assured the producers that he could speak English, and thus they signed him. They'd never met him in person. When Gert Frobe arrived to begin shooting, they exchanged pleasantries in English, but a problem very quickly became apparent. Frobe did not speak a lick of English. And when he did speak it, it was lost under this thick German accent.
Gert Frobe, absolutely wonderful. Yes, he's the perfect Goldfinger. Does he speak English? Yeah, I've spoken to his agent, he speaks English. Gert Frobe arrived day one on the set. How do you do? I'm very happy to meet you. That was all right. Then I talked to him and I realized he didn't speak a word of English.
The very first scene I shot on the balcony with Gert. And Gert had to start the scene. And he said, I thought, oh my God, what was that?
Saltzman and Broccoli were apparently inconsolable when they saw the dailies and heard Frobe's undecipherable utterings.
English, motherfucker, do you speak it?
Luckily, director Guy Hamilton's solution was to dub Frobe.
Cubby and Harry, when they saw the first rushes, went bananas. They said, you can't understand the thing. I said, don't worry, because we're now going to dub him later.
He worked with actor Michael Collins. What manifests is probably one of the most effective examples of dubbing ever in cinema. Collins manages to expertly capture Goldfinger's menace in sync with Frobe's lip movements.
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
there are a few sections of Frobe's undubbed voice floating around. For example, you can hear it in the trailer right here.
Choose your next witticism carefully, Mr. Bond. It may be your last.
And then you can also hear Frobe's original undubbed voice in the final film when Bond is spying during the Mafia meeting at Oryx's stud.
It can't be. I think the expression is blown. My plan is foolproof, gentlemen. I call it Operation Grand Slam. I have devoted 15 years of my life to it.
Definitely a funny story in retrospect, but this must have been extremely nerve-wracking during production. And as I said, luckily, Gert nails the physicality and the feel of Goldfinger, and Michael Collins does a great job with the dub, and it matches the characterization quite well. I will go so far as to say it is the best dub job in movie history. The Goldfinger production ended up taking 19 weeks to film. They started in January 1964. They shot across a variety of locations, including Miami, Kentucky, Switzerland, as well as the commonly used sound stages in the Pinewood Studios in London.
I was having a lot of trouble with parking tickets in London around that time.
Editing and a few final shoots to round out the film, along with post-production and the effects like the laser, were all completed shortly before the premiere in London on September 17th, 1964. Now for the fun part, let's go through and talk about the movie itself. Woo!
Woo, woo.
Goldfinger, of course, opens with the gun barrel sequence, one of the most iconic and defining elements in all of James Bond. It's great. You as the audience just staring down the barrel, getting ready for the action. Bring it on, Bond. Entertain us. Every James Bond movie opens with the gun barrel sequence, except that one. This gun barrel sequence is actually the last movie to use the gun barrel sequence from the one they shot for Dr. No. And fun fact, the man walking across the screen here is not Sean Connery. It's a stuntman, Bob Simmons. In Thunderball, they bring in Sean Connery to do one. In retrospect, it's such an oddity to look back at these first three Bond movies and know that the Bond actor is not actually doing the gun barrel sequence. It's such a signature thing of each of the Bond actors. How do they walk up? How do they shoot? What pose do they take? It gives the audience a feel for the Bond we're getting ready to watch. They couldn't bring him in?
No.
Goldfinger is, of course, where they start to bring in those classic James Bond pre-title sequences that we all know and love. Dr. No did not have a pre-title sequence. It went from gun barrel straight to song. Ugh. I don't like it. And from Rushed with Love, we get a pre-title sequence, but it's a fake sequence with the fake Bond. Red Grant kills this fake Bond. They put on this weird plastic makeup on him to make him look like a mannequin or something.
There was an imposter.
But as I said, here in Goldfinger is where we finally get this short, almost exactly 5-minute, self-contained action sequence to kind of whet your appetite for what you're in store for as the audience. An appetizer or an hors d'oeuvre, as the fancy pants say.
Chilled monkey brain.
Screenwriter Richard Maibaum and director Guy Hamilton brought in this idea.
It seemed to me that if we could do the pre-credit sequence, which is a wonderful piece of nonsense, I mean, where you can go swimming with a seagull on top of your head and you can unzip your suit and have a white tuxedo underneath. If that makes you laugh, let's all now, after the credit titles, go for a great big ride and have fun.
The Goldfinger book opens remarkably different from the movie. Both of them are focused on a mission Bond just finished in Latin America, revolving around an opium ring fronted inside a fertilizer business that Bond ultimately blows up. However, in the book, Bond is depressively ruminating on one of the nameless Mexican henchmen he killed while drinking in an airport bar lounge. The opening line is, James Bond, with 2 double bourbons inside of him, sat in the final departure lounge of Miami Airport and thought about life and death. Snobby Hemingway. The guy he's ruminating about is the henchman that he electrocutes at the end of the pre-title sequence in the movie. The movie obviously chooses to open up in a different way. Instead of getting that moody, emo Bond, Timothy Dalton vibe, we get more of a Roger Moore here. The very, very start, Bond with a duck disguise. It gives us a quick laugh, and then it sends us straight into some stealth and some gadgetry. All completely done with visual storytelling. No words. Look kids, no hands. I think in general, most people agree that the duck is on the acceptable side of the Dalton-Moore campiness scale.
Sean Connery and kill Timothy Dalton.
And hey, this introduction is definitely better than the introduction that Brosnan had in Goldeneye, so you're not going to hear me complaining.
This is my introduction as James Bond. Photographs and images that one will live with for a lifetime.
Beg your pardon, forgot to knock.
Why did they think that was a good idea? Then Bond goes to the party, looking all suave in his tux and his toupee. If you were going to use one adjective to define Connery in juxtaposition to the other James Bonds, it's gotta be cool.
Cool party.
Makes eye contact with this woman doing some type of interpretive dance, and looks oh so suave as he lights a cigarette, perfectly in sync with the explosion. And then Bond follows this lady into her quarters for a private dance lesson. And we get this really cool special effects shot where we can see the guy sneaking up behind him in her eye. These shots are great because it gives the audience an insight into the perception and the awareness that someone like James Bond must have to stay alive as a spy. It turns out this nice lady was a traitor. Who would have guessed?
I mean, if you believe that, monkeys can fly.
And he electrocutes this guy in the bathtub. This guy actually got pretty burned in real life from the bathtub. There was a hot pipe making steam. This look of pain on his face is genuine.
The steam comes out. Well, the force of the steam, the hose pipe wrapped itself around my leg, gave me a sort of a second-degree burn. And everybody thought it was down to my acting. See, but it wasn't. It was down to sheer pain, actually.
Hey, who needs good actors when you can just hurt them?
I want to play a game.
And then we get another piece of the Bond formula that this movie really helped amp up. Campy quips.
Shocking. Positively shocking.
So yeah, the Goldfinger pre-title sequence is kind of a work of genius. It gets endlessly emulated by just like not all future Bond films, but also in the following decades, just tons of other films in general. Here's just a few examples off the top of my head. The duck. The duck gets copied by the manta ray in License to Kill. The scuba suit. That gets copied in the James Cameron Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, True Lies. And it also gets referenced in Remington Steele, which, oh, who's that? That's Pierce Brosnan. He's talking about Goldfinger and doing a thing from Goldfinger, and he's a future Bond.
Not a bad move.
Goldfinger, Sean Connery, Gert Frobe, United Artists, 1964.
Oh.
And yeah, this is in the late 80s. This is like 30 years later. And then in the second Indiana Jones movie, my personal favorite, Temple of Doom, Steven Spielberg just blatantly steals Sean Connery's tux in the opening sequence and slaps it on Harrison Ford. I will say it looks better on him. You get the idea. Iconic. The title song.
Goldfinger.
The most classic, renowned, and seminal James Bond song. But before we get to the ears, let's do the eyes. Robert Brownjohn did the title sequence animation. He had previously done the title on From Russia with Love, and we can see a lot of similarities between the two sequences. For example, these projections with words in From Russia with Love, and then the projections we see here in Goldfinger. The graphical effects were inspired by a real-life movie theater experience. When people would stand up during the projection, it would cast upon their body, just like what we see here with Goldfinger. The model that is projected upon in this title sequence is Margaret Nolan. Margaret Nolan plays Bond's masseuse in the Miami scene following the title sequence. It is not Shirley Eaton, aka Jill Masterson, aka Jill Masterton, as she is in the books. That's the woman that's killed by being painted gold. I don't know why they didn't just use Shirley Eaton. I mean, she's an attractive enough looking lady. No idea at all. Now let's talk about the actual song itself. So Dr. No and From Russia with Love both had title sequences with animations. From Russia with Love used an instrumental version of its song mixed with the classic James Bond anthem. And Dr. No had this.
Tree blind, my signal, tree blind, my steer to go.
We can see in some ways Bond had a bit of a rough beginning. Suffice to say, Goldfinger is where they really hit their stride. The song was composed by the legendary John Barry, and it was sung by Shirley Bassey. John Barry was given little direction for the song, but director Guy Hamilton showed Barry the song Mac the Knife. This was a really popular song from 1928, kind of the exemplary bad guy ballad.
Now that Maggie back in town.
Despite the lack of direction, what we get is pure gold. And as iconic as this song is seen in retrospect 60 years later, John Barry revealed in an interview that Harry Saltzman, one of the co-producers of the Bond franchise, absolutely hated this song. He called it, quote, the worst song I've ever seen in my life. Harry Saltzman unfortunately passed away in 1994, and thus was not subjected to the nightmare that was late 90s boy bands. Goldfinger to this day is one of the best and most iconic James Bond songs. Big, brassy sounds frame Shirley Bassey's wailing vocals as she describes our villain's corrupt nature, affectations, and unnatural appetites, especially for gold. Shirley Bassey would actually end up singing a couple more James Bond songs, specifically for Diamonds Are Forever and Moonraker. She is the only artist to ever be asked back for more than one James Bond song. This underlines how monumental this track is. She absolutely nails it here. There's a fun story she tells about how she nearly fainted as she struggled to hold that last note.
It was an experience to do that, and they had an enormous screen. I had to sing Goldfinger to what was happening. But till we got to the end, and the credits didn't seem to end, and I had to hold this note. And it was like forever. And I was looking at John, I was going blue in the face. He loves gold. The credits are going, the credits are going. He's going, hold it, hold it. I nearly passed out. Cruel business, show business is very cruel.
They recorded this at the legendary Abbey Road Studios in London. A little fun fact, Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin was working in John Barry's orchestra when this track was being made. And the guitar that you hear in the track was played by Jimmy Page. Now, let's go back to John Barry. John Barry did the arrangements for Dr. No, and then he was the full-on composer for From Russia with Love. John Barry actually ended up composing 11 Bond movies. His final movie was The Living Daylights, which was Timothy Dalton's debut Bond movie. Oh, how unfortunate that John Barry couldn't hold on for GoldenEye. Eric, Sarah, what are you doing here? You get back inside that GoldenEye retrospective now! Anyways, This is the Bond movie where John Barry starts doing one of my favorite things that most Bond movies do. He takes the melody of the Goldfinger title song, the one sung by Shirley Bassey, and he weaves it into the score of the entire movie. It becomes this beautiful continuous soundscape. This technique really gels the movies together, while also at the same time making each of them very unique and recognizable by their sound and score alone. And yeah, as I said, this song is one of, if not the best James Bond song. It's hard for me to think of any others that can even top this. Personally, I'm a really big fan of all of Pierce Brosnan's title songs. Not that one. Anyways, moving on. After the banger title song, Goldfinger opens up to kick off its main story in Miami.
Hotel Miami Beach. I want you to go over there.
M has put Bond up in a fancy resort. Turns out, it was for a mission. He makes contact with Felix Leiter to tip him off to Auric Goldfinger, who also, by happenstance, happens to be at the resort. Felix Leiter has been recast from Dr. No. The character did not appear in From Russia with Love. However, much like previous director Terrence Young, Jack Lord, who played Leiter in Dr. No, wanted more money.
Money, please.
Lord also demanded co-star billing with Connery. The producers decided to recast the role. Leiter was ultimately played by Cecil Linder. But don't worry, they're just going to change Felix Leiter actors again in like every future Bond movie. Of note on the production side, parts of the Miami sequence were the first day of shooting for Goldfinger. The full sequence footage was collected over a series of shoots, and it's worth noting because you can tell. Numerous green screens and choppy editing to stitch all this together. Peter Hunt, the editor, speaks about this further in the banned Laserdisc commentaries.
It was a very unfocused beginning, this whole movie, and the whole idea of card playing and him listening to his person in the room. I suspect that Guy Hamilton didn't even believe it and was not at all sure that it would work. I don't know what he really thought, but I don't think he thought it could work. I mean, the sequence didn't work when we got it back. Unfortunately, for my eye, you can see that the entire sequence is made up of inserts.
Our glorious introduction to the title villain is via him cheating at a round of Go Fish. The Goldfinger plot manifests through a card game, which is an interesting quirk of multiple Bond stories. This is also the case with Ian Fleming's first novel, Casino Royale, as well as Moonraker. Goldfinger is playing cards against DuPont, who in the novel is the person that prompts Bond's investigation against Goldfinger, not Felix Leiter. The DuPonts had seats at Le Chiffre's tournament in Casino Royale. I think it is a bit strange that Goldfinger would work so hard to cheat this guy for money when he is about to pull off Operation Grand Slam and have more money than he can shake a stick at.
What's true is that in 48 hours, you and I will have more money than God.
As far as characterization goes, though, it is a very direct way to underline the greediness of the villain. Auric Goldfinger becomes the star of the Bond villain template that would continue in many of the later movies. His story is tame compared to what follows in the franchise. He's greedy and he wants gold, all the gold. He loves the stuff.
I want, me, mine, now.
The seeds of the future are definitely there. He is a formidable opponent for James Bond, and Frobe stands toe-to-toe, even overshadowing Connery in some of the scenes. His given name, Auric, means pertaining to gold. So his name is basically Goldfinger. AU is the chemical symbol for gold, and in addition to starting his personal name, it is also displayed on his license plate of his gold-plated car. The film does a great job emphasizing this. He wears something gold or yellow in nearly every scene. In the scene where he's not, he's holding a gold pistol. His hair is gold. Nearly all the henchwomen are red, blonde, or have yellow skin. In the book, his Rolls Royce is literally made of gold, and he melts it down as a way to facilitate his illegal gold operation. In the book, he paints all the women he sleeps with gold so he can pretend he's making love to gold. In the book, his cat is gold. It's orange. If they remade this movie nowadays, I bet they would give him a gold grill and have him kill some poor soul with some twisted machination involving liquid gold. Bond ultimately stops Goldfinger's game of Uno via seducing a series of women, culminating with him stopping Shirley Eaton's character, who is helping Goldfinger spy on the cards. No money for you, Goldfinger.
So you get nothing.
Shirley Eaton, like Gert Frobe, was also entirely dubbed in the movie. Dubbing women in movies was very common at the time. In the banned Laserdisc commentary, Peter Hunt noted that she didn't even realize she had been dubbed.
In fact, one famous actress didn't even know that she was revoiced, and she came to the premiere.
Bond ends up getting knocked out by Oddjob at one of my least favorite sins in old cinema. That you can knock someone unconscious for extended periods of time by just hitting them in the back of the head. In real life, if you got knocked out like this bad, you'd have like a near-lethal concussion, and it is extremely serious. I have just always seen this as lazy writing. Anyways, this part is where Oddjob judo chops Bond. It's got a bit of an interesting story. Harold Sakata was a Hawaiian-born, Japanese-American Olympic weightlifter and professional wrestler. He went under the stage name of Tosh Togo. Director Guy Hamilton cast him after seeing him on a wrestling program. A real-life strongman, and he certainly looks like it. He hit Connery a little too hard here. Take a look at that face. This is real. This is the face of agony. Ouch. That's gotta hurt. Apparently the next day of shooting, Connery came in complaining of back pain and negotiated an increase in his salary.
And he gave me that chop behind the neck at the fridge. He put me on the floor.
This is discussed further in the banned Laserdisc commentary by film historian Bruce Eder.
Sean Connery, by contrast, wasn't really anxious to do Goldfinger. His acting range had grown enormously since the first two Bond movies, and after From Russia with Love, he'd done Woman of Straw, a thriller with Rafe Richardson and Gina Lollobrigida, and Alfred Hitchcock's Marnie. He suspected that Goldfinger would be even more successful than the first two, and was concerned about being permanently typed in the role of 007. He wanted new terms from Saltzman and Broccoli. Connery had said publicly in February of 1964, a month before shooting began, that he was reluctant to do the new movie, throwing Saltzman and Broccoli into a panic. He did report, however, under the multi-picture contract he had signed for Dr. No, but it was during the shooting of this scene that his dispute with the producers seems to have come to a head, according to a story told by Tom Carlyle, the film's publicist, to Connery biographer Kenneth Passingham. According to Passingham, when the scene of the karate blow was shot, Connery complained of an injury and headache and went home for the day. When he returned, he had a new contract giving him an increase in pay and a percentage of the picture.
Man, all the jokes and stories of the Bond producers not wanting to pay people just keeps growing and growing. I wonder why that is.
And there was the big man, Sean Connery, standing there right in front of me. And he said, "I've just seen what you did there. Very good." I was silent. And then he asked me a question, one that has stayed with me to this very day. He said, "Are they paying you enough money?"
And then Bond wakes up to discover one of the most images in all of the Bond legacy. A gold-painted lady.
The naked lady covered in gold paint. It was just sheer magic. It was unbelievable. You know, life changed for me.
There's a bit of a goof here when Bond flips the light switch down. That's because they shot this on set in Pinewood Studios, which is in England. In the land of the free, we flip our light switches towards the heavens. Anyways, As I said, the gold-painted lady is one of the most iconic pieces of imagery in not just Bond, but all of cinema. It has been endlessly parodied, imitated, referenced, even by Bond itself, nearly half a century later. I mean, this is cool and all, but we know this movie is garbage. Her death is attributed to skin suffocation in both the novel and the film. This was Ian Fleming's idea. He got it from a 1946 horror movie, Bedlam. However, skin suffocation is fictitious. It's not real.
You are fake news.
You can't actually die from skin asphyxiation. Humans don't breathe through the skin. They aren't frogs. They're not amphibians. Except for our reptilian overlords. Pretty much the only way you could die from this is like, number one, maybe from extended exposure and toxins leaching into your body, or number two, the paint's covering your skin pores while you're exerting yourself and it prevents you from sweating, and thus evaporative cooling can't take place and you overheat and die. I mean, this is back in the day before the internet, when we didn't really have the summation of human knowledge at our fingertips to check the validity of anything in real time, so it's forgivable. Simpler times, kids. It was nice. Even in the band Laserdisc commentary in 1991, they mistakenly think you have to leave a piece of skin bare to prevent you from suffocating. It's utter nonsense.
We didn't paint her all over, we only painted the back of her, I believe. But if you do paint somebody all over, you've got to leave a spot for them to the skin to breathe through.
There also was, and still is, this urban legend going around that Shirley Eaton died from this paint while doing this scene. No. She was on the cover of Life magazine 2 months after Goldfinger's premiere. As of September 2024, she is still alive and kicking at 87 years young. And they probably covered her in gold lead-based paint. She's the only person from this movie still alive and they covered her in lead paint. Go figure. I think overall the gold-painted lady was a very imaginative touch by Fleming for Goldfinger's character. Ian Fleming was a rampant smoker and drinker, but he considered philandering with ladies of the night outside the normal and acceptable appetites of men. So this was a way for him to illustrate Goldfinger's deviant nature. One last little note here, Ian Fleming visited the set during the shooting of the Miami scenes. He had his third fatal heart attack months after settling the Thunderbolt case with Kevin McClory, and only a month before Goldfinger premiered on August 12, 1964.
Playing his golden harp.
Bond puts in a phone. They ask about Dink.
Dink?
I wonder why everyone's worried about Dink. And then he goes back to MI6 to rendezvous with M. He says that cabaret dancers have also been known to die of skin suffocation.
It's been known to happen to cabaret dancers.
I don't know where he heard that. Has he been going to P. Diddy's parties? Okay, I understand that joke created 6 decades of temporal dissonance with the audience, but I'm leaving it in. Moving on. Goldfinger's not the first movie to do the M scene. It's definitely not the last. This scene's kind of boring. We don't even need a breather because nothing exciting has happened yet. And then there's another second stuffy, boring scene where he gets dinner, and then he gets the Nazi gold to entice Goldfinger. Let's just move on. Low points of the movie. Oh yeah, Moneypenny. Flirts with Moneypenny. But Goldfinger isn't the first to do this. He does this before. He does this again. But after this, we get to one of those iconic classic elements that Goldfinger pioneers. The Q branch scene, ripe with playful sarcasm and contempt. Q, of course, previously appeared in From Russia with Love, but it was only in the most surface of presentation. Here we get the first incarnation of the Q that would become a core part of the cinematic Bond's identity. And that isn't thanks to Guy Hamilton.
At the rehearsals, I was working at a desk and Bond comes in and I got up to greet him. And Guy said, no, you don't take any notice of this man, you don't like him. And I thought, well, but this is Bond, this is James Bond, and I'm just an ordinary civil servant. I must admire him like everybody else does. And he says, no, of course you don't. He doesn't treat your gadgets with any respect at all.
Hamilton came up with the idea of having Q be less businesslike than before, instead being more impatient with the childlike and cavalier Bond. Hamilton instructed Desmond to play the part as a grumpy, short-tempered, and impatient man. And this would define a character that would end up becoming one of the most important parts of the Bond mythos. Also of note is Harry Saltzman. He was kind of the mind behind the insistence of Bond having all these fantastical gadgets. Fleming's novels don't really even contain any of the sophisticated gadgetry that we see in the cinematic Bond. And this is also the movie where Q says this pretty famous line.
I never joke about my work, 007.
So Bond works his way to Goldfinger with the second occurrence, referencing Fleming's chaptering. This one is coincidence. Bond claims to have the same golfing handicap as Goldfinger. Additionally, he entices Goldfinger's money lust by betting him a shilling a hole.
Shall we make it a shilling a hole?
It's good, efficient characterization. Shows Bond being cheeky and cunning, and shows Goldfinger being gluttonous.
I'm hungry!
This is where we are formally introduced to Oddjob, Goldfinger's manservant. So Goldfinger notes that Oddjob is a mute in the movie.
He's an admirable manservant, but mute.
And yeah, Oddjob only grunts a few sounds the whole movie.
Ah, ah. Ah, ah, ah.
The book explains his quiet nature. He was born with a cleft palate, just like Joaquin Phoenix. And I got something to say about this. This introduction is a little weird to me. Like, Oddjob has to remember judo chopping Bond just a few days ago in Miami before they murdered that girl, right? Is this supposed to be written something like, Oddjob totally remembers Bond, but he tragically and unfortunately can't talk and communicate that to Goldfinger because he's mute? If that's the case, couldn't he just write it down on a piece of paper? Does he not know how to write? Yeah, why doesn't he do that? So maybe he is dumb. Oh, sorry, snowflakes. Neurodivergent. Or maybe it's supposed to be written something like Oddjob and Goldfinger both remember Bond, but they think Bond doesn't remember Oddjob because he got slapped upside the head.
Twice our paths have crossed.
Nope.
No.
I'm wrong. It's just a plot hole. This movie has more plot holes than a Memphis, Tennessee interstate after a snowstorm.
Why'd you dig my hole, man?
Goldfinger just straight up murdered a lady in front of Bond and then knocked him out. What is this guy doing? Why doesn't he just kill Bond? He obviously has no problems killing people. He just killed Jill Masterson / Jill Masterton. Why not tie up loose ends? But no, he's got to wag his gold member around a bit. Oh my gosh. Ho-ho! Okay, yeah, that's awesome. Never mind. So yeah, Oddjob is probably the most recognizable henchman in all of the Bond filmography. A trendsetter, as with so much of Goldfinger. This is the first Bond movie to have that special henchman with an odd name, an odd appearance, and an odd method of murder.
Clue from Parker Brothers.
They try and recreate this character over and over again in Bond, but no henchman ever comes close. Except Jaws. Jaws is awesome. Actually, Jaws is better. He's in 2 movies, and he goes to space. Oddjob is endlessly referenced.
Who throws a shoe? Honestly.
Oof, so close. Almost had him. Now he can go back to living in luxurious solitude while not answering for his war crimes and make mediocre paintings. This is cool and all, but who's paying for this? Do you think this happens a lot? Like, this is clearly some type of elite country club that Goldfinger is a member at. Do they just go out and go, oh, another statuette is gone. Oric must have had a bad back 9.
I own the club.
Of course he does. So he does this with impunity. Fitting characterization. Then they finally go golfing. So something people always say about the Goldfinger's pace is that it's really fast and well constructed in the first half of the movie, but then it just falls apart in the second half. It's so slow. I completely disagree.
No.
After the title sequence, the movie opens with Bond just piddling around in his little periwinkle outfit here at some Miami resort. Then we get not 1, but 2 boring and protracted scenes with him and M. One is in an office, and then one where they're eating dinner with a bunch of stuffy, boring old dudes. The Q scene is okay because the gadgets are fun and it's kind of like a Chekhov's gun. Ooh, how is Bond gonna use these? But then after that, we just go to this golfing scene. Who likes golfing? Who even golfs anymore? Who's got time for this?
Ain't nobody got time for that.
I ain't got no time for this. I got Reddit to doom scroll. I gotta run Mythic Plus keys and gear my Pandaran Monk for rating. I gotta watch the new season of Great British Bake Off. The only golfing I like is putt-putt, 'cause of the whimsy.
You're gonna die, clown!
I was sitting here watching this scene bored out of my toaster. I thought this went on for like 20 minutes. I checked the runtime. This sequence is only 5 minutes. I can't take it. Golf. It's forgettable. Regardless of my opinion on this terrible sport, I'm going to just throw in this fun fact. Apparently this movie and this scene created Sean Connery's burgeoning and lifelong fascination with the sport. There's a few funny bits in the banned Laserdisc commentaries around this part in the movie. At one point, Bruce Eater starts rambling about how Gert Frobe used to be an ex-something-something party member in World War II.
In an interview shortly after Goldfinger opened, Frobe freely admitted to becoming a Nazi Party member in 1929. During the war, he did serve as a non-commissioned officer in the German army occupying Vienna.
Additionally, apparently Sean Connery thought this golf ball thing was really stupid.
Sean thought that was ridiculous. Nobody could squash a golf ball. But that's the whole point, Sean. It's obvious by now that before the picture's over, you and Oddjob are going to tangle, so you're going to be fighting a man who can squash golf balls, amongst other things. I still say it's rubbish. It'll end up on the cutting room floor.
And then director Guy Hamilton talks about how much Harry Saltzman and Albert Broccoli freaked out when they heard Gert Frobe speak.
Faster, Gert, quicker. When Cubby and Harry saw the dailies, they went ape. Goldfinger was speaking total gibberish.
Bond tracks and follows Goldfinger to Switzerland. This is a good integration of Bond's gadgetry usage into the plot. This is actually the first movie that Bond drives his Aston Martin DB5, the brand that would become strongly associated with the Bond image and branding. Aston Martin didn't think that the movie would boost their sales, so the producers had to purchase the vehicle from the company for the movie. Funnily enough, sales of Aston Martin increased 50% after Goldfinger. Suffice to say, the producers didn't have to buy an Aston Martin for the Bond movies ever again. Peter Hunt notes the producers' frustrations with Aston Martin in the banned Laserdisc commentary.
Aston Martins were always the bane of Broccoli's life. Cubby Broccoli always swore, because they had to buy them, they had to pay for them. They were not given them by any means.
Ford, on the other hand, was happy to have their cars in the movie and struck a deal to have their new model, the Mustang, featured. Ford's Mustang is driven by Tilly Masterson. Tilly is the sister of the now-deceased Jill on a shallow revenge plot against Goldfinger. She attempts to snipe him and completely misses, narrowly avoiding Bond as well, who is completely oblivious to this. Hey, take a wild guess what Goldfinger's favorite kind of apple is. Golden Delicious. I personally think Golden Delicious are kind of mushy. Not top tier. I'm more of a gala or gala man myself. Bond encounters Tilly by eviscerating the side of her car with a gadget inspired straight out of Ben-Hur. The stunt looks quite awkward, as Peter Hunt notes in the band commentary.
That's back projection. I doubt that a lot of these sequences would work today if you did it in a film. I think the public would expect more out of a film of today's caliber.
Tilly is a lot less developed in the movie than the book. The most interesting thing about her is the revenge motivation, being Jill Masterson/Masterton's sister, but she is just quickly killed off in the movie to underscore Oddjob's threat level. However, in the book, she survives with Bond and is taken to the ranch and ends up being Pussy Galore's lover. She makes it all the way to the final battle at Fort Knox before Oddjob gets her with the hat.
Oddjob with the hat?
I think her inclusion in the movie is quite pointless and stilted. It exists as an artifact of the book and probably would have gotten polished out with a few more script revisions. The most interesting thing about her, revenge for her murdered sister Jill, is barely explored and just leads to her being target practice for Oddjob.
Bullseye.
Peter Hunt has a few choice words for the actress as well in the band commentary.
Tanya Mallet was the name of that girl. Tilly Masterson. Tanya Mallet. I don't know what happened to her. She wasn't a great actress, I'm afraid. She needed a lot of encouragement. But she was a pretty girl. Very pretty girl. Nice girl. I don't know what happened to her. Probably got married and had a big family.
Bond sneaks up to Goldfinger's smelting operation in Geneva, where he's melting down his solid gold car for smuggling, and then we get this great car chase with the great payoff with the ejector seat. This ejector seat moment is an extremely important moment in Bond, all of Bond. It's the first use of one of these completely fantastical and wacky gadgets.
Whatever you do, don't touch it.
Then there's this old lady. Who's this old lady? This is hilarious. When I was a kid, a dumb kid, I always thought this was Goldfinger's mother for some reason. It's like my mind couldn't make sense of what this meant.
Inconceivable!
And apparently Alfred Hitchcock loved this.
Hitchcock invited me to lunch. He'd seen the movie. I don't think he particularly cared for it. But as we parted, he said, "The little old lady at the gate, bowing and scraping, 2 minutes later swinging that machine gun, like that, made my day. Had a feeling he wished he'd thought of it and used it."
Here's a question. Why does Bond need a bulletproof rear sliding panel if the rear window is bulletproof glass? Here's another question. Why doesn't Tilly Masterson get decapitated like the statue in Odd Job Waxer? The car chase ends a bit awkwardly. Bond crashes into a wall.
Now here's something that I screwed up. It doesn't work for me. It's not clear. If it becomes clear, it's too late. Bond is heading down the alley. A car is coming at him head on. It doesn't come to a stop despite machine gun fire. He's about to crash into it. He swerves into the wall to avoid it. There is no car. It's his own headlights, reflected in one of those corner mirrors. It's not at all clear. Hate the whole thing.
But then, Bond wakes up strapped to a solid gold table with a giant laser hanging above him, aimed directly at his testicles.
The idea of it is so good and so terrifying. Every man, I think, could be put in the position of having his balls cut off like this with a laser beam.
This is undoubtedly the best scene in the entire movie. It is absolutely one of the most enduring and emulated sequences in all of film. What else is there really to say? It's great. This also houses one of the most famous lines in all of James Bond.
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
I will say, I think the rationale that is constructed for Goldfinger to not kill James Bond is a little flimsy. Obviously, James Bond isn't going to die because it's a James Bond movie, but this is the best they can come up with.
You're forgetting one thing. If I fail to report, 008 replaces me.
You are quite right, Mr. Bond. You are worth more to me alive.
Here's some fun facts. The laser scene was actually Gert Frobe's first day of shooting. And the novel uses a buzzsaw instead of a laser. Lasers didn't even exist when Ian Fleming wrote this in 1958. For the movie, the production bought a real laser, but the laser didn't show up on film, so they had to add the effect in post-production. The way this stunt was done was rather interesting. They got the table to melt by filling in the cut with soldering metal, and one of the effects guys was just like crouched underneath there with a acetylene blowtorch melting it slowly.
We had to pre-cut the area which was going to melt, then very carefully fill the whole lot in with solder, and then, of course, make the top finish again to look like gold. I was underneath that thing, that table, the gun, which was acetylene that was cutting the channel. Somebody had to be under there, of course, in case the confounded thing went wrong at the last minute, and it didn't stop when it should.
Good night, Mr. Bond.
Bond gets convenient for the movie plot knocked out and wakes up to quite the sight.
My name is Pussy Galore.
The line that Bond says was different in the earlier script, much more suggestive. Instead of saying, "I must be dreaming,"
I must be dreaming.
he says, "I know you are, but what's your name?" Honor Blackman was Guy Hamilton's first choice to play Pussy Galore. She was an extremely popular actress at the time, starring in the British espionage show The Avengers. She got replaced on that show by Diana Rigg, who ended up playing Tracy in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Film historian Bruce Eder discusses the uniqueness of Honor Blackman further in the band commentary, but overall she was a perfect fit for this particular role.
Blackman is the most unusual of all the Bond women on a number of counts. For one thing, she's the only actress ever to play a James Bond love interest, if you will, who was older than the man playing Bond. Sean Connery was 33 years old when he did Goldfinger, while Blackman was 38, hardly the pliant and sweet young talents that have passed through the series before or since. For another thing, she's an actress, first and always. The fact that she is extremely attractive didn't hurt her career, but Blackman never entered beauty contests, sent agents or producers pictures of herself in wet t-shirts, or any of the other things that most of the Bond women have done, at least on occasion, on their way to fame. She is one of the few actresses to appear as a Bond woman who has seriously benefited from the experience. The irony was that Blackman 4 years earlier had almost given up acting.
The producers and United Artists were extremely worried about Pussy Galore in the film and dealing with the censors. To prevent potential censorship issues, United Artists executives wanted to change the name of Pussy to Kitty. Luckily, they kept it real and kept it true to Ian Fleming's vision, and I think it really helped elevate Bond culturally. People remember this. People remember Pussy Galore.
My name is Pussy Galore.
Multiple people involved with the movie discuss all the controversy with the name in the banned Laserdisc commentary.
And here is the delectable Miss Pussy Galore. I seem to remember there was a nervousness on the part of the producers at the fortunate choice of name. I took the view that Fleming had named her thus, 1 million readers had read it in print, so the censor was really trying to close the stable door long after the horse, etc. But I think it was Tom Carlyle, our 7-foot-tall publicity man, who settled the issue by getting published a picture of Prince Philip and Honor Blackman with the charming caption, Pussy and the Prince.
The censorship story was great here. They sent me across to America. At that time we had the Catholic censorship, and they knew we were going to have a problem with the name Pussy Galore. Although it was in the book, I don't know why we should have done, but they were very concerned about whether they would get that by. And the moment I arrived in New York and gave an interview, I immediately mentioned her name and said, well, there's a great character called Pussy Galore. And that was out, and that was it. And from that time onwards, people talked about it. So when they came to see it on the censor, they'd already heard about the name Pussy Galore. And it had been spoken about by so many people for so much because of the name that I think they were defeated. They were preconditioned to it.
Most amazingly, while magazines like Life had no problem mentioning Pussy Galore by name, Sports Illustrated of all journals simply called her Galore.
Also, this is the only time that Sean Connery as Bond ever says shaken not stirred. And I mean ever, in any of the movies.
A martini, shaken not stirred.
Bond tries to be a sly little spy and pumps Pussy for information for Operation Grand Slam, but fails.
Here's to Operation Grand Slam.
We get an indirect nod to her quote-unquote lesbianism that the film very subtly tiptoes around.
You can turn off the charm. I'm immune.
I think it's a bit of a shame that they didn't put more of this in the film adaptation, but as far as 1960s sensibilities go, this wouldn't have gone over well with the general public, I think. Bruce Eder ruminates on this a bit more in the banned Laserdisc commentary.
The lesbianism is toned down almost to the point of non-existence in the screenplay, except for little lines such as her telling Bond to forget his charm because she's immune. Actually, Blackman wanted to tease the audience with other references, but unlike Terence Young on the 2 earlier pictures, Guy Hamilton didn't permit much deviation from Goldfinger's script, and he denied her the opportunity to have quite that much fun with the role.
Pussy threatens to shoot Bond with a Smith & Wesson, and Bond warns her about the cabin depressurizing. It's a setup for the end of the film. Be careful, Pussy. Remember the last time Bond encountered someone with a Smith & Wesson?
Mr. Smith and Wesson. And you've had your 6.
It's really nice because in the 60s, I think very few people would have known about cabin depressurization, and they played extremely straight. It works really well informing the audience without giving away what's going to happen at the finale. Thumbs up, Richard Maibaum. Pussy sends Bond to Goldfinger's lair in Kentucky, and we're introduced to Pussy's posse of flying femme fatales, complete with a backing score that is extremely brassy and very sexual. Geez, John Barry, a little on the nose here. And speaking of soundtracks, the soundtrack that plays when Bond arrives to Oryx Stud is this hilariously cliched country jig. Is this what the Brits think Americans listen to?
Other partners.
The stud farm is alright. The coolest room is the war room where he gasses all the mafia members. Goldfinger is not the first Bond movie to have the evil villain lair. Dr. No had the secret base. But this movie features and utilizes Oryx Stud Farm much more extensively than anything we saw in the lab with Dr. No. They also end up reusing the Stud Farm idea in A View to a Kill, which was Roger Moore's final movie, complete with the facelift.
Oh my God! What's wrong with your face?
It's a little awkward how Goldfinger just gives him this very cordial greeting after he just attempted a sci-fi circumcision on Bond. And then Bond just hangs out in the prison cell while Oryx kills the gangsters. He does eventually escape to spy on Goldfinger, but I just want to briefly mention one of the biggest issues with the Goldfinger story. Bond basically does nothing the entire story except get shuttled from place to place to place to place the whole movie. He has like no agency to the plot. M sends him to Miami, M sends him to play golf. He travels to Switzerland to spy on Oryx, and then Oryx takes him to Kentucky. And then Oryx takes him to Fort Knox. And then they put him on the plane to meet the president. Then the movie ends. That's it. So this problem actually exists in the novel. Bond is basically Goldfinger's secretary for the second half of the book, so it's understandable why it's here. However, it is bad writing to have your main character not be an active participant in the movement of the primary plot line. Full stop.
Enough said.
Richard Maibaum, you get a pass on this thumbs down because it's in the novel. Ian Fleming, you get one instead. Goldfinger discusses his evil plan with the mob. Side note, this scene is also copied into A View to a Kill in the investor scene on the blimp.
What's wrong with your face?
Oryx apparently flew out all these mobsters to have a very important meeting the day before Operation Grand Slam. They're not happy about it. They want their $1 million. But Goldfinger says he'll give him $10 million tomorrow. And that's why he set up this meeting, I guess, to tell him that. Why does he set up this meeting to get hassled by a bunch of mobsters a day before Operation Grand Slam? I don't know. Why does he even need these guys? I don't know. Apparently they inadvertently helped him set up parts of Operation Grand Slam.
You made that possible, Mr. Solo.
But why does he need them for planning an execution with 24 hours notice? I mean, this plan's already got to be locked and loaded, right? They all tell him the plot is stupid.
I've heard enough.
So he kills them. You know what? This plot hole is stupid.
You're out of order!
This literally makes no sense. I can't even jump hoops in my mind to come up with the reason he did this like I did with Alec Trevelyan's death at the start of GoldenEye. Maybe he just didn't want to pay them back? Seems risky the day before the Operation Grand Slam.
Risky. Very risky.
Why didn't he just wait till afterwards? Are they maybe like his only competition on the gold market? Does Goldfinger not know what happens when he kills the heads of a bunch of mafia families? Has he not seen The Godfather?
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
Ironic coincidental side note, they had an ex-something-something party actor play a villain that is going to gas a bunch of bankers with nerve gas. That's a thumbs down, Richard Maibaum. Oddjob disposes of the one gangster that didn't jive with Oryx and left. The car-crushing idea came from Wolf Mankiewicz. He was an uncredited screenwriter for Dr. No. They needed to come up with a plausible way to get rid of the body, and Mankiewicz pitched this to them. The car used, the Lincoln Continental, this was a super fancy car in the 1960s. It'd be like crushing a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or something, or whatever a fancy car is. Kind of just a shock factor, seeing money and luxury tossed away on screen for entertainment. Very Bond. I'll also say, very American. Auric brings Bond to the porch before Operation Grand Slam. This is the calm before the storm scene, where he reveals his evil plan, another plot contrivance that all these lazy movie writers use. And he's drinking mint juleps.
Mint julep?
Oh, very menacing.
Traditional but satisfying.
Also in this scene, you can really see the edge of Sean Connery's toupee hairline kind of like coming up near his forehead. This is where Richard Maibaum puts in his critique of the novel's heist plan through Bond, and how they changed the plot to irradiate the gold from the books.
You know Operation Grand Slam simply won't work. I've worked out a few statistics of my own. $15 billion in gold bullion weighs 10,500 tons. Now, at the most, you're going to have 2 hours. 60 men would take 12 days to load it onto 200 trucks.
You got meta commentary, plot hole correction, and improvement to create a better finale. Thumbs up, Richard Maibaum. Also, the new plan will irradiate the gold for 57 years.
Who mentioned anything about removing it?
Hey, that's just in time for this 60-year retrospective. Like and subscribe. Act 2 ends with Bond sleeping with Pussy Galore. She initially doesn't want it, but then she does. Many people critique this scene in retrospect through the eyes of modern sensibilities, but I have a much less hostile interpretation of the sequence. I think the source of much of the animosity of this scene stems from the misunderstanding of Pussy Galore's sexuality. People commonly note her as being a lesbian in the book, but this is not actually technically the truth.
Technically.
In Fleming's novel, Pussy just tells men that she's a lesbian because she was sexually abused by her uncle when she was a child. So people start raging and then just end up with this take of a quote-unquote toxic misogyny Bond cured Pussy Galore of lesbianism with his gold member. However, this argument is constructed on false grounds. One of the spiciest bits from the band Laserdisc commentary is in regards to this scene.
I think this is one of the trickiest scenes in the movie. How to go from dyke to sexpot to heroine in the best of 2 falls, 1 submission, 1 roll in the hay. I suppose it comes off.
The julep tart enough for you?
The final act of Goldfinger opens with Pussy's posse of femme fatale flying circus pilots executing Operation Rockabye Baby. Ever wonder why there are no close-up shots of the pilots? That is discussed in the band Laserdisc commentary.
To fly the Piper Cubs, we'd assembled a gang of tough hombres, mostly dust-cropter pilots. They were all given black shirts and awful blonde nylon wigs from the local Woolworths. You'll notice I could never go in close on those planes. Once airborne, they insisted on removing the wigs, too sissy. Those who kept them on could be seen with cigars clamped in their mouths.
Another fun bit of lore, during the establishing shots of the planes flying around, they were supposed to be flying at 5,000 feet. That did not work for the footage, it didn't look good, they were too small. So they had them fly at 500 feet. And that breached Fort Knox's no-fly zone. The US military was not happy. There are like 10 shots of people passing out from the gas. This definitely needed editing more. However, I'll say it's forgivable because we're at the finale, the tension's quite high, everyone's excited to see what's gonna happen. Maybe you can think of it as it's dragging out the tension before everything explodes in the climax. They bring back the laser again to break inside the bank. I do want to know what kind of mega battery they had in the 1960s to power a portable, high-powered laser with enough wattage to melt through steel doors at Fort Knox. Tesla should look into these. And then we get a look into the vault. I'm gonna just throw out my crazy conspiracy theory here about the inside of the Fort Knox set. On the Inside Goldfinger featurette, associate producer Stanley Sopel noted that the US government wouldn't let anyone inside Fort Knox. But after the movie premiered, set designer Ken Adam got a letter from a woman running or holding a position of authority at the vault.
And interestingly enough, we did get a letter from the controller or whatever she was, the lady who ran Fort Knox, and complimenting our art director on his imagination, because very few people have ever seen the interior of Fort Knox.
She congratulated him on how great the set looks, despite the fact that no one was allowed inside to see it. Wink wink, nudge nudge. See where I'm going with this? Guys, somebody totally snuck in Ken Adams to let him get a sneak peek inside Fort Knox for the set of the movie.
It's a conspiracy.
I have no proof of this, but it just makes too much sense. How else did he get it so accurate?
Complimenting our art director on his imagination.
I need to point out one flaw with the set though regardless. You cannot stack gold bars this high. Gold is too heavy and too soft. They'd flatten themselves like pancakes under their sheer weight. You can maybe only stack them like 2 or 3 feet. Also, this is the future Bond co-producer Michael G. Wilson's first cameo in a Bond movie. He's playing one of these soldiers guarding the laser. They lock Bond inside with the bomb. How convenient that Bond is literally handcuffed to the most important part of Goldfinger's evil scheme. Meh. Look at this look this guy gives to Bond when he chains him to it. This guy had one job, and he took it and he ran with it. He's like, yeah, fuck you. So this is Kish. He is technically a named henchman of Goldfinger. Like, that would make him an Odd Job tier level villain. I didn't even know this until I was preparing for this retrospective. He first appears by darting Bond at the end of the laser scene, and he's making that little smug, weird face again. And then I was watching the Inside Goldfinger featurette. They try to legitimize him to like very important henchman status alongside Odd Job. They call him the man with the nuclear key.
Rounding out Goldfinger's villains was Kish, the man with the nuclear key.
And they interview the actor. Maybe they just interviewed him because that was the only guy that returned their phone calls. Or the only guy that was still alive. Kish's looks are pretty good. What is this guy all about? I don't know. That would require effort to give him some type of characterization. Richard Bybom, that's a thumbs down. So the American military gets set in, and Kish, Oddjob, and Bond all get sealed inside the vault together with the bomb. Kish tries to save all their lives by taking the fuse out of the bomb.
The bomb. I take the fuse out.
But Oddjob's like,
Oh, hell no.
and just kills him. The part where Goldfinger puts on the uniform to disguise himself is great. It really shows how clever the character is and how prepared and like how much he thought through all this plan to execute it properly. Except for whatever was going on with those mafia guys. Oddjob just tossed this guy off the balcony. It's funny how he slides right here. This is before we put rubber soles on the bottom of shoes. Those leather bottoms are slippery. Kish says Oddjob can be a hero.
You can be a hero?
What is he even being a hero for? Making Goldfinger rich?
Money, please.
Does Oddjob have some type of secret romance or bromance with Goldfinger?
I love you, man. I love you too, bud.
This is just like such a sloppy toss-away line.
You can be a hero?
You can be a hero! Like, come on, Kish. Everyone is clearly in this for the money. It's like an office job. We're a family, guys. Oh, wait.
What would you say you do here?
You're laid off. We gotta get those profit margins up for the CEO's bonus. So, Oddjob is clearly a doofus. He wants to die because reasons, and then literally tosses Bond the keys to his handcuffs. Oddjob really likes tossing things.
I like turtles.
Then there's the final fight scene. It's alright. Not great, but serviceable. However, why is this so quiet? Where is the music? Where is the Bond action music, John Barry? You wrote 007 Takes the Lecter. Why isn't it playing? Here, don't worry guys, let me fix this. Let me fix it. This really could have used some more choreography, but I think it gets carried by the tension of the plot elements. And then the very peak of the climax. Bond throws the hat at Oddjob and misses. I don't know if Bond planned this or what. Did Bond fumble his way into victory, or was this electrocution idea part of his plan? Fun fact, Harold Sakata severely burned his hand reaching for this hat. See that face? That's the face of real pain. But he was committed. He didn't want to pull away before Guy Hamilton said cut. A true professional.
He got badly burnt, and he was hanging on there, and I didn't say cut because all the sparks were flying everywhere and it looked good to me. So finally a Harold thing, and then he'd really burnt his hands, but Guy, you didn't say cut, so I just hung on in there.
I'm just gonna go with Bond fumbles his way to victory, considering in a few seconds he's just willing to rip out these wires out of a nuclear bomb before it blows up. The climax ends on this great moment, the timer stopping on 007. This was actually a last-minute idea by Harry Saltzman. The original script had the timer stopping on 003, but he just couldn't resist having it changed in post-production. That's also why Bond says his 3 more ticks line.
3 more ticks and Mr. Goldfinger would have hit the jackpot.
It technically breaks continuity, but it's worth it, it's great, it's classic. Iconic. The climax is as Bond as we can get. An ill-positioned 007 defeats the villain's intimidating henchmen against the tension of a world-ending countdown. And then his success, stopping the bomb, is punctuated with a bit of camp.
Oh, he blew a fuse.
The "he blew a fuse" line is a nice bit of symmetry with the start of the film, where Connery says shocking.
Shocking.
But this time, the audience is on board and in on the fun.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
In the banned Laserdisc commentary, the editor Peter Hunt makes some very crass comments about Sean Connery around this point in the movie.
The greatest thing of all was having cast Sean Connery as James Bond, who really was a very sexy man. There are very few characters, very few film stars, actors, whatever, who have that sort of quality. I guess Clark Gable had it, and there must be 1 or 2 others who had it. But I mean, you know, they virtually can walk into a room and fuck anybody. And that's the great ability of his sexy charm, I suppose, that he has with women particularly.
It turns out Bond managed to touch the heart of Miss Galore, causing her to change the nerve gas to an off-brand, non-toxic variety. So Bond saves the day by seducing a lesbian and shocking a deformed Korean. Naturally, the US president wants to congratulate him for his deeds. This is a nice nod to JFK, who loved the books and listed From Russia with Love as one of his all-time favorites. And oh no, it's Goldfinger trying to sneak his way over to Cuba to hide in the lands of Justin Trudeau's father. The plane finale is great. It's a false ending.
False alarm! False alarm!
Bond movies do false endings a lot. They're really fun for the audience on this kind of like roller coaster ride that is a Bond movie. I think Casino Royale has the best false ending. But Goldfinger didn't pioneer this. We of course get this at the end of From Russia with Love.
She was about 70 then, and she was screwing like mad when she was about 80.
I'm sure this sequence was captivating in the 1960s. I think it was the first example of decompression on the big screen like this. And 60 years later, it's still pretty exciting.
Wow.
In Fleming's novel, Oddjob and Goldfinger die differently. There's no vault battle, and they're both on the plane at the end of the story. Oddjob gets sucked out of the window instead of Goldfinger, and then Bond chokes Goldfinger to death with his bare hands. A bit of a callback to Jill Masterson's gold-laden skin suffocation. Point of note, decompression wouldn't cause anything about the aerodynamics of the plane to change in such a way that it would cause it to crash. Regardless, Bond and Pussy escape via parachute, and then you get your standard Bond affair. They delay the rescue for Hanky Panky. Roll credits. Thunderball's next, baby. I'm sure that will all work out and not cause any problems at all. That's a wrap for Goldfinger. Uh-oh, Richard Mybom. It looks like your tally was 2 thumbs up and 3 thumbs down.
I want to play a game.
Goldfinger premiered in London on September 17, 1964 to critical acclaim. My favorite review from the time period that I found was from The Guardian. They called it the most exciting and the most extravagant of Bond films. Garbage from the gods. People saw this as a trashy, enthralling, fantastical popcorn movie, and they absolutely loved it. It broke box office records around the world. The movie was so successful that it made back its production budget of $3 million in just 2 weeks. The movie was so successful that some theaters were playing it 24/7 to accommodate demand.
And people keep paying to see it.
Goldfinger caused a massive boom in espionage films in the 1960s, so much so that in 1966 there were 22 examples of secret agent movies. Every studio wanted a piece of that James Bond pie. Goldfinger defined and distilled Bond into that trademark formula that kept audiences coming back again and again. An action-packed pre-title sequence, followed by a title sequence with the killer song set to the backdrop of naked ladies. Bond getting his mission from M and flirting with Moneypenny. Stopping at Q to get his gadgets for the mission, encountering multiple gorgeous Bond girls along the way. One of those girls getting murdered after she was seduced and entangled with Bond. A larger-than-life bombastic villain with a grandiose plan for power. An initial confrontation with the villain. An unforgettable henchman. Tons of action, set to the backdrop of the Bond theme and the title song. A little bit of humor, a little bit of camp. You got your puns.
Oh, he blew a fuse.
Your double entendres.
My name is Pussy Galore.
The villain's evil lair. And an action-packed, nail-biting, adrenaline-filled countdown to death sequence where Bond narrowly escapes with his life before ending up with the girl. Roll credits. James Bond will return. Wow.
Wow.
It's really quite shocking.
Shocking.
To see this formula so perfectly encapsulated in Goldfinger. And in the majority of the 20-plus Bond movies to follow, they would try to recapture that lightning they caught in a bottle.
Positively shocking.
So how did this massive success play out for some of the main figures involved? Sean Connery, of course, went on to do a handful of more Bond films. Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, Diamonds Are Forever, and the forbidden non-canon You Dare Not Speak It imitation Thunderball, Never Say Never Again. Sean Connery is fondly remembered as one of the best, if not the best, iteration of James Bond on the big screen, very successfully translating and improving the book character to the big screen. Gert Frobe had a successful acting career, appearing in many movies. Of particular note, he starred as the villain Baron Bombburst in the children's epic musical fantasy comedy adventure film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which was written by Ian Fleming and produced by Albert R. Broccoli. Honor Blackman went on to appear in a number of film, television, and theater roles. She is one of the only actresses to significantly benefit from being a Bond girl. Goldfinger even gave Honor her first big break in Hollywood with 1966's Moment to Moment. Harold Sakata went on to appear in several other movies and shows with similar roles, and formally taking on the defining moniker as a middle name, Harold Oddjob Sakata. He also did a number of commercials for Vicks cough syrup in the 1970s, of course, as Oddjob. Screenwriter Richard Maibaum would go on to contribute to many more future Bond scripts, 2 more of Connery's, Lazenby's single film, 5 of Roger Moore's, and both of Timothy Dalton's. John Barry, of course, went on to compose a number of Bond films, with his last being The Living Daylights. Director Guy Hamilton ultimately did 3 more Bond films. Connery's quote-unquote final Bond movie, Diamonds Are Forever, as well as Roger Moore's debut, Live and Let Die, and Man with the Golden Gun. Desmond Llewellyn, thanks to the direction of Guy Hamilton, would be cemented as an enduring element of the Bond formula, appearing in every future Bond movie except Live and Let Die, until he passed after The World Is Not Enough in 1999. This movie was, of course, massive for Everything or Nothing Productions. It exploded Harry Saltzman and Albert Broccoli's future with the James Bond franchise into the stratosphere. where James Bond would ultimately become one of the most recognizable characters in all of cinematic history, even to this day. They would continue on with their co-production partnership for a number of Bond movies, with their last being The Man with the Golden Gun. Albert Broccoli would go on to produce Bond movies until he passed away after the release of GoldenEye. Although the first two James Bond movies, Dr. No and From Russia with Love, were quite successful, it is Goldfinger that brought James Bond to new heights. And that is in large part to the tweaks and shakeups they made in relation to both the previous two movies and the novel. Here, 60 years later, Goldfinger is still celebrated as the James Bond movie of all James Bond movies. The iconic James Bond film. Let's close with the question. Of everything in Goldfinger, what is the most iconic, defining element in its sea of gold? Is it the gold-painted woman? Is it Oddjob in his hat? Is it the gadgets, Bond's Aston Martin DB5, the ejector seat? Is it Pussy Galore? Is it the laser scene? Or is it this line by Goldfinger?
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
If I was a betting man,
shall we make it a shilling a hole?
I'd put my money on the laser scene. Thanks for watching. Have a stellar day. Okay, look, I'd have massive restraint this whole video. I restrained myself from using this meme. And let me tell you, it was not easy. This is the lowest of hanging fruits. I wanted to use it so bad. Here it is.
I love gold.
Bye.